CrossFit has rivals. We already know that it's got big competition with Hyrox. It's been noted by the Barbell Spin in this article that lots of CrossFit gyms are converting to Hyrox affiliates, and I found out the other week that Hyrox has just overtaken CrossFit on Google Trends. On top of that, we've got a rise of affiliate fees for CrossFit box owners, and the CrossFit community has been outraged, even though, in my opinion, it seems like CrossFit is trying to bring more money into the sport and it's trying to save the sport in a way, but it's clear the CrossFit community is in a bit of turmoil and they don't really know what's going on. I went to fitfest on the weekend and it was amazing, but it made me think about this even more. There's a rising trend of other functional fitness competitions, and even as a CrossFitter, I think post-baby I might do one of those instead of a regular CrossFit competition. ATHX was at fitfest, and it's quite similar to Hyrox, but it's based on 3 different domains. You've got a strength area, an endurance area, and a metcon area. But like Hyrox, the whole competition is over within 2 hours, and that's one of the reasons that I think post-baby I'm more likely to train for something like that than I am for another CrossFit competition. ATHX is brand new, but it's drawing a crowd that already do stuff like Hyrox and some of the CrossFitters as well. It was clear when I was there that there was a mixture of different types of athletes, because some athletes on the strength section were shifting really heavy weights and doing split jerk, but there was other athletes that were clearly more general fitness people that had never tried a split jerk before and were trying to push press or even strict press the max shoulder to overhead. But the fact that it was a shoulder to overhead and didn't have to be a jerk or an Olympic lift made it super accessible. The reason this could be a serious threat for CrossFit is because more and more competitions in the CrossFit space are claiming to be scaled competitions but are not inclusive. I've had quite a few messages over the last week with people telling me how they've entered scaled competitions only to find out that there are pull-ups and toes to bar, and even in some cases wall walks and handstand push-ups in a scaled competition. Now, when I started CrossFit, you wouldn't find double unders, definitely not pull-ups or toes to bar or any sort of complex gymnastic movement in a scaled division. And some of the justification that I've heard is that CrossFit standards are rising, therefore the standard for scaled athletes has to rise. So if you think about previous years, only 10% got through to quarterfinals. That means about 10% are likely competitive level CrossFitters. And then there's probably a slightly bigger percentage that do take part in competitions, but they might not be competent in those harder gymnastics movements. It would still be a really small percentage that are capable of the more complex stuff. So by raising the standard for scaled athletes, you are reducing how inclusive the sport of CrossFit is to the wider community. And certainly people coming into the sport will see something like a scale competition, have pull-ups in it and feel like they can't do that. So competing for them would feel almost impossible, like it's miles off. It takes some people years to get their first pull-up. I also did a question box on my Instagram and lots of people replied to me saying that they found that they were getting disheartened with the fact that they couldn't improve a lot of the CrossFit skills. They felt like they were never going to get there because they were too hard and too far away. Lots of people thankfully still enjoy CrossFit even knowing that they're never going to get their first pull-up potentially. But lots of other people also feel really sad about that fact, and many have left their CrossFit gym because they found it so demoralizing, especially when the gyms focused more on the athletes that were able to do those skills and focused more on the elite athletes or the competitive athletes, even though all of the members of all abilities are paying the same amount of money. Once you've done CrossFit once, you can quite easily leave and move to a Globo gym and just do some form of functional fitness style training and achieve the goals of getting functionally fit and healthy without having to work towards the skills within CrossFit. And I totally understand why people would leave if they were finding the high skill and random things that CrossFit puts in really demoralizing. It makes sense. But ATHX and Hyrox are a threat to this because they are inclusive. Pull-ups only featured in the ATHX Pro division, and all of the other movements were quite basic CrossFit movements, but obviously for the general fitness community, some of them were quite difficult. It's filling that gap between general fitness and kind of hybrid performance training and CrossFit, and making something that's accessible to those people that want to rise from the standard of the general gym stuff, but don't feel capable of maybe joining a CrossFit gym and doing some of those high skill movements. Because Hyrox and ATHX have less complex skills, it means you're spread less thinly when you're trying to train for it. Some of us that do CrossFit have super busy lives, and maybe we don't have a huge amount of time to commit to a CrossFit program. That means when we attend our CrossFit gym, maybe we do 3 days a week and we're missing out a huge chunk of the programming that might mean we're missing out whole days where movements are programmed. But But if you're doing something like ATHX or Hyrox, when you know what the workout is going to be well in advance, and in Hyrox's case it never changes, and with ATHX, from my understanding, it changes every year, but you know at the start of the year exactly what it's going to be, and it doesn't change from there. So you can literally train for that competition. You know exactly what the movements are going to be. But in CrossFit, they spring random movements on you at the start of the year in the CrossFit Open, and you have to figure out whether you can do it or not. And as fun as that is, and I have found that fun, after 6 years of doing CrossFit, it is getting a little bit tedious. And it often feels like CrossFit are making us do party tricks instead of things that are linked to functional fitness. The crossovers being a good example. Being at FitFest, I got to see some of the elite athletes go off against each other, and that was amazing. I've loved spectating the sport this year. I've definitely become more of a spectator than a participant in the competitive side. But it did also highlight to me the kind of level of party tricks. There was like a handstand relay thing, and I saw them do the pirouettes, which obviously they did at the CrossFit Games. And you remember the CrossFit Games had loads of like handstand walking obstacles. There's more and more of that coming in. And then in FitFest, they were doing backwards handstand walking. And in that moment, I realised that doesn't really link to functional fitness, certainly not for the general population. And I think it's fair to assume a lot of people come into CrossFit just so they can be generally fitter and healthier. It's not because they want to learn how to do kipping pull-ups, toes to bar, muscle ups, or handstand walks. I certainly came into CrossFit with the goal to improve my mental and physical health. And it's been realising that over the last few years has brought me back to those goals and made me realise I don't need to be pursuing getting better at CrossFit. I just want to get fitter. And I've really noticed that getting better at CrossFit doesn't necessarily mean that I am fitter. I have been fitter and less good at CrossFit at different times. It's so confusing, because CrossFit is sold as this ultimate test of fitness. But in reality, there's so much skill now, there's so much unknown, that it isn't anymore. But I think CrossFit sits in this space. You've got functional training as a whole, and CrossFit is a small chunk of that pie of functional training. And then Hyrox and ATHX also sit in within that. Hyrox is more like running for strong people that do a little bit of functional fitness. It's mostly running. I've done a Hyrox. I loved it, but I hated the running. There was definitely a lot of people that were just very good at running there. 90% of the event is running. But ATHX is different to that because there's a lot less running. There's still running. There's a 5k on an assault runner. Or you could also pick the bike, the ski erg and the rower, which personally I would pick that, and if I was in a mixed pair I'd make my partner do the run. But it's definitely closer to the more functional fitness, functional training zone, and we can see a lot of the people that are doing it are in the sort of hybrid training space. And CrossFit's claim is to get you functionally fit, but if we are functionally fit, then as CrossFitters we should be able to dabble in something like ATHX and do really well. But I do think often we're spread so thinly and we spend so much time working on getting better at so many different skills and being prepared for the unknown and the unknowable that we actually miss out on getting functionally fit in the regular, boring, normal ways, such as a long distance run or row or cycle. And that's definitely something I realised when I started rowing and preparing to do a 10k. I love rowing and I got a rower at home, and I basically started rowing every single week, and I found it made me so much fitter in my CrossFit performance because I was doing a little bit of long distance, and that was really missed out within CrossFit. Even when you do like a long time domain CrossFit workout, it just doesn't train you in the same way as a long distance row or a long distance cardio piece. And I know loads of people will say, oh, if you're doing it properly then you should be adding in all of those things, but the general population probably only has time for 3 to 4 times a week in the gym, if that. They certainly don't have time to do some CrossFit workouts and then a 30 to 40 minute cardio piece and then some extra gymnastic stuff to get them better at that and all the other stuff on top. And again, this is what makes something like Hyrox or ATHX more accessible, is that they can train for those specific things. It will get them functionally fit generally for life, but also for the event that they want to train for. I also found ATHX much easier and more interesting to watch than CrossFit. Not the elites, that was interesting because we know the people. It's exciting to see them and you kind of know what they're going to do, and there was a good announcer that was telling you everything that was happening. But the strength in depth triples were also there, and the few times I walked past it didn't seem very interesting. Mostly because they were either doing thrusters, or the other workout I walked past there was just one person holding a ball and then the other person rowing, and you had no idea what was going on. And yes, I think the purpose of like strength and depth triples or the other competitions that are going on is more to do with the people entering the event. You don't really go to watch those kind of things. And the only reason I was because I was at fitfest. It was a fitness festival and there was loads of exciting sports to watch. But I think the way these CrossFit competitions make money is more to do with the participation. And yes, it had loads of people participating in strength and depth triples. But you could much more easily walk over to the ATHX section and see how people were doing because it was clearly a race. Especially in the Metcon section, there were people like trying to beat each other and you could see that, and that made it exciting. I think also being within the CrossFit space, we forget what the rest of the fitness space thinks of us. And I know like a lot of them just hate us because we do the silly movements. I was trawling through some videos and it was really interesting to hear the perspective of people that do Hyrox. They still think CrossFit, even though they're super fit Hyrox athletes, incredible hybrid athletes, they still think CrossFit is like really far out of their reach. And that's because of the high skill Olympic weightlifting, the gymnastics and some of the other stuff that we do. And we know it's not that far out of their reach. It might be more difficult for them to get really good at it, and maybe they want to be really good at Hyrox or ATHX or whatever else they do. And it might take a hell of a lot more work. It definitely does take a hell of a lot more work to get really good at CrossFit. But I wonder if the introduction of ATHX, which kind of bridges the gap between Hyrox and CrossFit, will make more of them consider going into CrossFit.
Thrusters, kettlebell thrusters, we had some burpee box jumps, we had low sandbag carries. There was lots of different movements that were really tough, but this is a little bit more CrossFit-y.
I was really surprised that this guy thought that dumbbell snatches were just like a really like CrossFit-y movement, because to me, dumbbell snatches are quite a basic functional training movement. And like a barbell snatch is like an Olympic weightlifting movement. I don't consider like the dumbbell snatches and that kind of stuff that we do at Speed to be high skill, but it's clear that other people do. I've also heard of like Lucy Davis Fit, who's a really good hybrid athlete, refer to CrossFit as being like super scary and high skilled. And I think that is the perception of lots of other people, that it's not necessarily accessible, it is really hard and it's for high level athletes. And we know that that's not the case. Being in CrossFit gyms and seeing lots of beginners, people of all shapes and sizes, people of all abilities, just having a go and scaling it to their own ability. But we know that a lot of people still don't go into CrossFit because they think that it is just for these really amazing athletes, because CrossFit doesn't do a very good job of advertising to the everyday person. But ATHX and Hyrox really don't need to, because it is already accessible to the everyday person. Sure, they're high intensity and they're difficult, but so is a triathlon. You don't need to learn a whole lot of different stuff to be able to do a wall ball or a dumbbell snatch, but you do to be good at CrossFit, to be able to do Olympic weightlifting, gymnastics movements. That's so much more complex and takes so much more time. CrossFit does have competition, at least in the competitive space, and we're seeing more and more people train in a functional training way in the gym. And I don't think that means that CrossFit is dying. It might mean that CrossFit, the brand, is reducing, but functional fitness seems to be growing in lots of different ways. And it might mean that there's just loads of things that are very similar to CrossFit that are just not under the CrossFit umbrella. Hybrid training's on the rise, functional training's on the rise. Basically anything that means performance-based training is on its way up. And you can see that when you go into gyms and see the functional training space. I train in a Globo gym myself now, as well as a CrossFit gym. The equipment that they have is amazing. They've got an assault runner and I can train in that gym 24 hours a day if I want to. So whatever happens to CrossFit, I definitely don't think that the movement is going to die. I think functional training or functional fitness or whatever you want to call it will continue to expand, and that's really exciting. Let me know in the comments below if you think you're going to enter a Hyrox or an ATHX at some point in the future, and let me know what you think of this topic as a whole. If you like this video, you might want to watch this one next. It's about why CrossFitters quit. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!